Joe Walsh's life has been full of amazing highs and terrible lows. Walsh's story is full of sadness and strength. His mother's classical training made him interested in music at a young age, and he lost his father and daughter, which was very sad. Even though he fought addiction and became famous with the Eagles, he carried a heavy load that not many people could see. Walsh is finally telling the truth about his hard times as a rock star now that he is 76 years old, proving what his friends and fans have always thought about his private fights. Keep listening to find out. Joe Walsh got his start in music in a time of both ability and tragedy. Joseph Fiddler Walsh was born on November 20th, 1947, in Wichita, Kansas. Music was more than just a hobby for him. He was born with it. His classically trained mother taught him to love music when he was very young. But when his father died suddenly in a plane crash, it left a hole in Joe and his mother's lives. They moved around a lot before they found a safe home in Montclair, New Jersey. Young Joe took his first real steps into music in Montclair. He learned to play the guitar when he was 10 years old, because he liked the sound and energy of rock bands like the Beatles. He played the oboe in the school band, but the electric guitar was what he really loved, letting his feelings and artistic spirit flow through it. Joe's life took him to Kent State University as he grew up, where he began to dream of a life dedicated to singing. He was already playing with Ohio bands at this point, which helped him improve his skills and confidence. While at Kent State, he started a band called the Measles. Soon after, he was put in charge of the hard rock trio, the James Gang. They became a big deal in Northeast Ohio very quickly. They've opened for big names like Fleetwood Mac, The Who, and even Led Zeppelin. But there was still darkness on the way. Walsh was at Kent State on May 4th, 1970, when National Guard troops opened fire on a peaceful student protest, killing 4 and hurting many more. The event changed Joe's life and left an everlasting mark on his heart. Already having been through loss as a Gold Star kid. His father was a flight teacher and died on the job when Joe was very young. The tragedy at Kent State made him think even more about life and peace. Years later, on the 50th anniversary of that terrible day, Joe Walsh thought back and talked about how shocked and hurt he was to see his friends die from gunfire. The memory made him think of how fragile the balance is between rage and hope. In his songs and in his sense of purpose, the events of that day would always be with him, with more life experience and a broader view of things. Walsh finally quit the James Gang and started a new thing by getting together with Joe Vitale and Kenny Passarelli to form the band Barnstorm. After his time with the James Gang in 1972, Joe Walsh was at an artistic crossroads. Instead of joining a well-known group or sticking to a single theme, he chose to go his own way. Walsh put together a new band called Barnstorm with his college friend Joe Vitale on drums and Kenny Passarelli on bass. It wasn't just a job. The mix of rock, folk, jazz, and even some Caribbean style was a brave change of sound. That year's self-titled debut record was a big change that showed how talented Walsh was not only as a guitarist but also as an adventurous composer. The record didn't really take over the charts. It was well received by people who really liked Walsh's risky innovation. Tracks like Turn to Stone and Mother Says stood out because they showed how smart his lyrics were and how creatively he played the guitar. Barnstorm was more than just a band to music fans. That show showed how Walsh's art was changing over time and gave him a place to try new things with his sound. By this time, other artists, like the members of the Eagles, were starting to notice Walsh's skills, who would later play with him in the band. Barnstorm's second album, The Smoker You Drink, The Player You Get, came out in 1973. It had the hit song Rocky Mountain Way. With its catchy slide guitar and laid-back groove, the song made Walsh a famous solo artist and was a turning point in his career. Even though Barnstorm broke up in 1974, it had a huge impact on Walsh's career. Having the freedom to be creative with Barnstorm for a few years gave him the confidence and skills to grow as an artist. This stage was very important in making him the artist he was to become. It set him up for future success with the Eagles and cemented his place in rock history. The Barnstorm broke up a year later, and Joe Walsh was at the top of his game when he joined the Eagles, one of the most important rock bands of the 1970s. His time was just right. which fits with the band's move toward a heavier guitar-driven sound and the exit of founding member Bernie Leadon. Walsh had a magnetic stage personality, plus he was a great guitarist with a subtle sound that fit perfectly with the Eagles' changing style. This relationship not only helped the band reach new heights, but it also made Walsh famous all over the world. Walsh was an important part of the Eagles' famous 1976 album not long after he joined, The California Hotel. He played some of the most famous guitar duets in rock history, especially with Don Felder on the title track. The haunting riff from Hotel California is still one of the most famous guitar solos ever, drawing people in with its mystery beauty. Walsh also brought another gem to the Eagles. It became a huge hit that showed how good Walsh was as a guitarist and singer. It showed off the band's new, darker sound, which was different from their folk rock roots and more rock-like. Walsh's powerful guitar playing helped the band change their style, which helped them become stadium rock stars and reach more people. His daring spirit and artistic flair gave the Eagles a boost and made his friendship with bandmates Glenn Frey and Don Henley stronger. Even though the Eagles were already famous before Walsh joined, it was after he joined that they had their most popular and praised period. When Joe Walsh joined the Eagles, their famous song Hotel California was already making waves around the world. But behind all of his success was a sad part of his life that not many people knew about. A few years before, in 1971, Walsh married Stephanie Rhodes, and the two of them had a daughter named Emma. In 1972, there was no one left in their family, but disaster struck in 1974. A careless driver caused a terrible car crash that hurt little Emma's head very badly. Even though everyone tried, she died that very night, leaving her parents in a sea of sadness. It's so sad that Joe was on tour when the accident happened. He rushed home to deal with his unimaginable loss. For Walsh and his wife Stephanie, the accident was the start of a rough time. As they dealt with their sadness, their relationship began to fall apart, which eventually led to their divorce. Joe was in a lot of pain after losing Emma, and he had a hard time getting through the dark times. He put all of his sadness into his music. In 1974, he released Song for Emma, a very personal song he wrote in honor of his daughter. When he talked to Rolling Stone in 2016, Walsh talked about how Emma's death has changed his life in many ways. He admitted that he was very angry at God and the world, which made him have a so-what attitude that made him do bad things to himself. He turned to drugs and drink to dull his pain and block out the truth he couldn't stand the thought of facing. Even though he was having a hard time, Joe found a way to remember his daughter. He built a small memorial pond in North Boulder Park to honor Emma. It was a quiet place for him to think and connect with her spirit. Joe Walsh did everything he could to live the rock and roll life. It was normal to stay up late, party hard, and do things that hurt yourself. No matter how crazy he was, it didn't stop him from being very successful, even though he was really close to ruining himself. Walsh knew something had to change in the end, though. His way of life was not sustainable, no matter how exciting it all seemed, and he was about to snap. It's a better place to work in the music business now that it's changed over time. Things were very different when Walsh was at his best, though. Hedonism was almost expected, and the constant stress of traveling made drugs and alcohol easy to get. For a lot of singers, using drugs was like a rite of passage, and a lot of artists were. This cost the business world a lot of talented people. Some people died way too soon because they couldn't get away from their addiction. But Joe Walsh did something that not many people do. He made the choice to face his problems straight on. It was hard and difficult for him to get sober. There will be no nighttime change. In an honest chat with Billboard in 2018, Walsh talked about how drugs and alcohol had become his higher power, a crutch that made him feel alone and brought out the worst in him. He became angry and resentful, which made people avoid him and hurt his job. Like many actors, Walsh used alcohol to help him deal with stage fright at first. It was scary to think about going on stage without it. But in 1993, he finally done something that would change his life. He got clean. He was afraid that getting sober would make him less creative or less able to act. But he took the plunge anyway. Walsh told his story in his song One Day at a Time from 2012, giving fans an honest look at the ups and downs of addiction. In a 2016 interview with Rolling Stone, Walsh talked about his problems and how, for years, he kept up a front to hide how much his addiction was hurting him. But eventually it was too much for him, and he went down darker roads that led to an accident that almost killed him. He might have been saved by hitting rock bottom, giving him the push he needed to get things back on track before it was too late. Sad to say, so many of his friends and classmates couldn't avoid that fate. Joe Walsh brought more than just great guitar skills to the Eagles when he joined in 1975. People knew him for living a crazy, uncertain life. His hotel room adventures were just as famous as his music, which made some people wonder if he'd fit in with the Eagles' more laid-back style. The band had their doubts behind closed doors. They were afraid that Walsh's wild parties would go against their image. In the end, his crazy behavior did get the band kicked out of a few places. But Walsh's instrumental skill could not be denied. With his guitar riffs, energy, and songs, he gave the Eagles' sound a new edge. Years later, Walsh told the Daily Mail that his crazy behavior wasn't just a phase of being a rock star, but a cover for deep-seated fear. Walsh often felt like he had something to prove when he was around stars like Glenn Frey and Don Henley, who were known for writing great songs and having great voices. This feeling of not being safe led him to act recklessly and abuse drugs. Walsh's life got worse after the Eagles broke up in 1980. Without the organization of the band, his drug use got worse, and it got worse when he was dating Stevie Nicks. The way they were connected turned into a bad loop of partying and using drugs. Over time, even the Nicks recognized that their relationship was fueled by their drug use. When the Eagles got back together in 1994, Walsh finally faced his inner problems. It was his colleagues, especially Timothy B. Schmidt, who told him to get help because they were worried about his health. It was more than just a chance to play music again at this get-together. Walsh got the drive he needed to take back his life. He accepted being sober.